I don't have anything to write about it.
At least not to me.
Keezy already wrote everything about them.
You try that on your TWA on Thursday and see how that score goes.
That was my sentence. I don't know how to spell cheese. What did you say? I said if you're shaking from the I don't ever knew about the
Figure it out. Darby, what do you have?
Chief is big.
That's a popular sentence today.
What?
Chief is big.
I said chief is
Not to be confused with chief is tall. That's a whole. Did you go tall or did you go big as well? You had okay. You had tall. Oh wow.
I said McMurphy is a loud man.
Loud man. Okay. Taylor
McMurphy is a guy. He's a dude.
or McGurgy is a guy. Ooh, we could have is a goose. Did Bryn come up with a simple sentence?
I said chief is not a bird.
Chief is not a bird.
Why? I mean, you're not wrong. I like birds. They're saying chief, so I.
You're not wrong.
I spelled chief wrong.
Half Native American.
I did not spell it easy. I'm dumb.
Okay.
Dogs peeked in the squirrel holes.
You said peaked.
Peeped.
Peaked?
Look at these. There's like less space
What's
between
wrong
6
with
and
the
5.
the rest of the
I see. Why are the spaces getting smaller?
It's the way life is sometimes. All of these are simple sentences. And when we say simple sentences, that doesn't mean that therefore the sentences have to be, and this isn't a complaint about any of the sentences up here. It doesn't mean that they have to be juvenile, immature. It doesn't mean they have to be 3 words long. Chief is big, chief is tall. That kind of stuff. Anyone have like a definition as to what are the components for a simple sentence? There's 3 things that you need, not counting punctuation, because that would be 4.
Subject, verb, predicate,
Verb and predicate are the same.
object.
Well, the verb, I should say, the verb is typically the first part of the predicate. So you have a subject and you have a predicate. The predicate includes the action. So chief is big would be the predicate. You could simply say chief talks. Talks would be the verb or the predicate. So you got a subject, you got a predicate. You don't have to have a direct object. You don't have to have a prepositional phrase, but it has to be a complete thought. Okay, and so if it has the subject, it has the predicate, it's a complete thought, it ends up being a complete sentence, and it is a simple sentence. You can have lengthier, simple sentences. So, for example, anyone else in the book like Loud of the Patients that you think of? Besides McMurphy, like Roller. So McMurphy and Roller have to change is to are.
I love men.
Thank you. That's still a simple sentence. You have a compound subject in the sense that you're talking about McMurphy and Roller, but that is your one subject. You could also have a person or a thing, and really the dog has like the most action here because everything else is to be verbs. The dog peeped into squirrel holes, and then what was the last thing that the dog did that Chief was able to see? Doesn't get hit by, we don't see it get hit by the car. The dog peeped into squirrel holes and ran, scurried. The dog peeped into squirrel holes and scurried toward the road is still a simple sentence. There is a complex predicate where there's multiple actions, or at least there's multiple verbs, but it's one predicate that one dog does multiple things. So if we were to say, hey, write a simple sentence, that doesn't mean you have to go 3 words or less, 5 words or less. In this case, we got what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 It's still a simple sentence. So there's nothing wrong with simple sentences by any means. Can you think of taking any of these sentences and turning it into a compound sentence?
Murphy is a guy and Chief is not a bird.
We're going to combine two of them. And with compound sentences, you probably were told the mnemonic device to remember your coordinating conjunctions back in 4th grade and 7th grade and 8th grade. And Bryn's forgetting this. Remember fanboys? So fanboys, it is an acronym for and, nor, but, or, yet, and so, or SS. These are all referred to as coordinating conjunctions. Coordinating conjunctions are used in compound sentences where you use those to combine them. So we had our example that, what, Chief is big? Or no, what'd you say?
Murphy is a man.
McMurphy is a guy and Chief is not a bird. Or you could say, but Chief is not a bird or whatever. So what I've done is you have two independent clauses or two simple sentences, and then you end up joining them with a coordinating conjunction. And then what's that piece of punctuation that goes along with it? A comma that comes before the coordinating conjunction. Of the coordinating conjunctions, I would say the first one, for, is the one that people are most likely to not use. For would be similar to because. I could not study tonight for I had to babysit my sister for a couple hours
Chief
or something.
is not a bird, or he is a man.
Yeah. Never was a truer statement ever uttered.
True.
Well done. Now, couple things. What's another way that you could combine two independent clauses to make it a compound sentence without using a conjunction? You could use a semicolon. So you could go, McMurphy is a man, semicolon, Chief is not a bird. I'm sorry? They should be. And honestly, with us using these two statements, they're not really perfectly related to one another. We could do something where, let's say we had a compound sentence. McMurphy enters the ward and he realizes that big nurse, again, we're going very simple, is mean. Compound sentence, he enters the ward, or let me do this, and he quickly realizes that big nurse is mean. I could go semicolon there. Those would be a little bit more related because of how close proximity they are. The semicolon, yes, if you're going to use it, the two sentences should definitely be related. I would say 95% of the time, if you're making it a compound sentence, they're probably going to be, for the most part, related. And of those conjunctions is probably the one that requires the least relationship. So if you're doing things like yet, but, for, those would certainly lend themselves, I think, to semicolons. Every now and then, I'll notice, and again, a lot of this is coming from independent reading essays and also from synthesis essays, people are just kind of throwing in a colon in between sentences, and there's no real reason for that. You would use a colon for our purposes, probably, I'd say only maybe 2 or 3 types of things. Could be for a list. Sometimes people aren't sure if I should use a colon for a list. So I have a lot that I need to get done today. Colon, do my homework, empty the trash, take out the trash, empty the dishwasher, clean my room. If you're unsure if you would use a colon, think of it as, oops, I didn't want to do that. Think of a colon as being the same as the phrase such as. So if the phrase such as would make sense, you could use the colon to separate it. I have a lot to do after school today, such as take out the trash, empty the dishwasher, cook dinner, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. You could use a colon if you wanted to introduce a quotation, a passage. Usually that gets saved for lengthier passages. Otherwise, most folks go with a comma. The other time that you could use a colon, and I'd say this probably happens more so in like a synthesis essay, sometimes people will be writing a statement. So it's a direct sentence, it's a statement, but then by the end, the sentence turns into a question, which you really should not do for the most part. Violent protests, think of this with your synthesis essay, can be necessary at times. But when does a person know if it is appropriate? What's kind of happened is our statement has now kind of turned into a question. I really shouldn't do this. A way that you could kind of get away with that would be take the comma out, switch that to a colon, and now put a capital, and you're kind of setting off the question as a way. So you're starting off with a statement and kind of introducing. Violent protest can be necessary at times, but when does a person know if it is appropriate? That would be a way that you could kind of get away with it as well. Someone was asking earlier about a dash. There's not really a grammatical time that you would have to use a dash. Matt, was it you asking about it? A good time to use a dash, though, would be if you wanted to emphasize an idea. So think of it as like the opposite of parentheses. When you go in parentheses, you're understating the importance of something. If you use a dash, you're identifying this is important, this is big, this is emphasis to it. But there's not really a grammatical rule behind when you would use a dash and when you don't. It's more of a personal choice. So it's a stylistic way to kind of add emphasis to stuff. Okay.
Why doesn't it feel like an interrupting thought? Put inside information.
If the thought is like describing, say, like the subject, the noun, McMurphy, an X or a I would say a veteran turned convict, comma, is a man. In this case, since it's kind of being served as like an adjective phrase for McMurphy, that would go with commas. If it's an interrupting thought where, yeah, it's not really describing like the subject or part of a sentence, it's kind of like a conjecture that's getting added to it, you'll see that set off with dashes. Yeah, that'd be right. Okay. How about a complex sentence?
So even if there's a semicolon, it's still a comma.
It should be. I don't really see how we would be using this in this class with like stuff that we've read. If you have a series, when you use commas like for shopping list or stuff that you have to do, if you were to say, I'm going to travel a lot this summer, I plan on going to Pittsburgh, comma, Pennsylvania, semicolon, Santa Fe, comma, New Mexico, semicolon, Chicago, comma, Illinois. The semicolon can be used to separate things in a series that already have a comma there. Because otherwise it gets weird to go Pittsburgh, comma, Pennsylvania, comma, Cincinnati, comma, Ohio, comma, all that kind of stuff. You don't have to use one of these sentences. Just come up with a complex sentence for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And if you don't know what a complex sentence is, just try. Try, Bryn, try. Because we're going to call on you.
That was the most complicated sentence of
Just never let the sentence end. Just keep writing.
You get like that one thing you made us read for the whole paragraph was one.
For the want of money.
No, I meant the house.
Henry David Thoreau. Like the preamble to the Constitution is like all one sentence, I think. The whole. I think that's all one sentence, maybe two. It's a big, lengthy, convoluted sentence.
I'm gonna write sentence out loud. right now. Let me think of one. It will be about like I just tell my life story in one sentence.
Yes.
A good complex sentence, or are you still thinking about space travel and colonizing other planets? Yeah.
Kinda, I don't know.
Maddie, has Bryn written anything yet?
I wrote Bryn.
I didn't say write about a complex individual. I just said write a complex sentence.
I'll write one about you, Mr.
It's about the cuckoo.
Yes.
Mr. Kane assigned us to
That's not a complex.
Mr. Kane enjoys having children read The Cuckoo's Nest. Wow. He takes his daughters to buy pumpkins to carve them into silly animals, such as Toothless from the How to Train Your Dragon.
From the How to Train Your Dragon.
That's the How to Train Your Dragon. All right, what do we have? Complex sentences. Yeah, but that has nothing to do with Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah, it does. Cuckoo's Nest is a simple.
Anna, how are we doing?
We have to use these. This is our cheat sheet.
You don't have. What do you have?
I was gonna say, although McMurphy was suspected of pretending to be crazy to benefit himself, he actually helped the other person.
Okay, so although McMurphy, you said,
Was suspected of pretending to be crazy to benefit himself, he actually helped
he actually. Did you do anything punctuation wise? After himself. Okay. All right. Any other?
When Chief woke up in the middle of the night, he looked out the window and saw a dog.
He left. You said through. Climbed out the window.
Let me get glass on him.
What was yours?
When Chief awoke in the middle of the night, he saw a dog outside the window.
Putting a comma there. He saw a dog through the window.
What did you get for this?
It's got long legs. He can like.
What did you get?
Although McMurphy was suspected of pretending to be crazy to benefit himself, he actually helped out other patients. Complex sentence. After Chief threw the control panel, he climbed out the window. Complex sentence. When Chief awoke in the middle of the night, he saw a dog through the window. Complex sentence. What if, I'm going to take number 2 here. After throwing the control panel, Chief climbed out the window. Simple or complex?
Wait, what did you change about it?
So, it's the same idea. We're still looking at the same concept. But after Chief threw the control panel, he climbed out the window, versus after throwing the control panel, Chief climbed out the window. The first one is complex. The second one is simple. And the reason being is let's put it this way. What is a complex sentence? A complex sentence is when you have an independent clause plus a dependent clause. That's going to make a complex sentence. Doesn't matter what order you go in. No. All of the ones that we wrote were dependent plus independent. When you have a dependent plus an independent, punctuation-wise, in the middle you do need to put a comma. If we were to take any of these sentences and switched it, let's say we take Megan's, He saw a dog through the window, and you might change like pronouns and all that kind of stuff, when Chief awoke in the middle of the night. Probably would want to go, Chief saw a dog through the window when he awoke in the middle of the night. Do I need a comma between window and when? I don't. If you're going independent first, followed by a dependent, you don't need to have a comma, although you do need to have certainly a period at the end. Probably, and said, hey, look at all these transitions. These are technically, it's not all of them, these are subordinating conjunctions. These are words or phrases that get used to begin independent clauses. Of the ones that are on this list, which one do you think is most commonly used? Taylor, which one did you say? I'd say probably because. I think although it does get used a bit, when, while, those are certainly common ones. I would say because gets used probably the most. A lot of folks get in the habit of mid-sentence, if you use because, you feel like you have to use a comma. You don't. So if you go independent clause followed by dependent, just like we have here, you don't need to have a comma. Now, still going back up here to number 2 and number 3, to be a dependent clause, you need to still have a subject, you need to still have some type of predicate verb, but it is not an incomplete thought. So after Chief through the control panel, what is my subject? Chief. What's my predicate verb? Through. After throwing the control panel, I have a noun, control panel, but I don't have a subject. It's like that direct object. So since this one is missing a subject in that quote-unquote dependent clause, it's not a dependent clause. It's just a phrase. And a phrase can still be added on to a simple sentence, and it's still a simple sentence. So you could say separate from, Cuckoo's Nest, after school, comma, Darby has choir practice. Even though it says after school, that's still going to be a simple sentence. After Darby practices at choir practice, comma, she has to go home and finish her homework. That is now a complex sentence because we have Darby practicing in that dependent clause. So your question, do you see the difference? There's not really any difference so far as the material that I'm covering or the idea that I'm trying to convey, but there's a difference between what is included in these dependent clauses. Well, the second one's not really even a dependent clause. So you could say, while watching TV, comma, I finished my essay, simple sentence. Whereas if you said, I finished my essay while I was watching Netflix, that is now a complex sentence.
Which one's more effective, or are they just the same?
Most of the time, it probably doesn't really matter. I'm going to have you write a simple sentence again, and it's up to you if you want to do something like after throwing the control panel. I think it's important to recognize that simple sentences, like number 3, don't have to equate to Chief is big, McMurphy is loud, nurse is mean. You can still have some lengthy sentences that are still simple. Complex sentences, when they're using these, are very good for showing relationships, how one sentence kind of relates to another. Number 3 still shows relationships, because you're saying after throwing the control panel. But complex sentences, they serve a good purpose of kind of showing how ideas relate to one another, typically better than a simple or a compound sentence does. What I want you to do is think of a rhetorical device that you can locate in the book. I don't need you to find a quote for it right now. But what should be like a first sentence of a body paragraph? Like the first sentence serves as the what sentence for a paragraph? Like the main idea, topic sentence, not a thesis because that's going to be for intro. Write a topic sentence that would be a simple sentence that identifies a rhetorical device that's in the book. So give me a simple sentence that includes a rhetorical device that you would be able to kind of come up with an example for. And again, not saying therefore on Thursday you need to write this for your TWA, but I just want you to write a simple sentence. And if you want to include an argument for what that rhetorical device does, that's great. If you can't think of it, that's not a problem either. So like a topic sentence for a paragraph introducing some kind of rhetorical device in the book. Anna said don't look at her paper. What? Mrs. King was also Mrs. Washington today. We all got to be Mrs. Washington.
Ever since she's like switching all around, not.
What's happened?
Ever since the teacher's switching all around.
If there's not enough subs, then you like cover.
Because like Senora was the health teacher today. Miss Burns came to our English class.
6th period. Yep, she told me. She said you guys were okay.
Megan and I literally just talked about the
Topic sentence. What would be one?
I have them.
So does Brooke apparently. That's what Anna says. I don't know if Brooke wants to share.
I'm not done, but I was gonna say, Kesey utilizes mechanical imagery to expose the patient's desensitivity.
Okay. Kesey, you said utilizes?
Yeah.
Mechanical, did you say mechanical diction, mechanical imagery?
Mechanical
Imagery to expose the patient's desensitivity.
Yeah. I think instead of expose, I would say reveal.
So you want to say to reveal?
Yeah.
Plural possession for patients. I'm assuming desensitivity. I'm not going to type it, Megan, but would you put?
Like violent diction affects the reader while shedding light on the injustice. Asylum.
Okay. And so for yours, you put while shedding light, and that's okay because you don't have a subject after while before that shedding light. So that would still certainly be a simple sentence. So, and I don't mean to confuse us with using the term simple and complex, but simple sentences can still be complex ideas, thoughts. Kesey utilizes mechanical imagery to reveal the patient's desensitivity. It's a simple sentence, perfectly fine. You started yours off with what kind of diction? Violent diction. You could use something like Kesey utilizes. It could go mechanical imagery reveals the patient's desensitivity. Kesey utilizes violent diction. If you wanted to vary it up, that it doesn't really matter with it. But this would certainly be a simple sentence. Did you have like a place in the book in mind that you were thinking of for the mechanical imagery? Can anyone think of a time when mechanical imagery is getting referenced, like in the book? In Chief Stream? Within that dream that's taking place? Same. Okay. If you didn't have an answer, you can say the dream, and we'll all be in the same place.
There's that one part where like they try to give him the pill and then he smashes it. And it's like, but when it touches air, it turns into dust. So you can't tell that it's like.
The transistors are in there, or all that kind of stuff that would be happening. Yeah. After you introduce the rhetorical device, before you get into quoting the example, and not that you're going to be able to quote for yours. You want to establish the context of the scene. I want to do that with a compound sentence. Before I do that, though, can anyone think of a reason why I wanted your topic sentence to be simple? What would be the advantage or the hope of having a simple sentence from like a syntactical standpoint?
Maybe if your topic sentence is simple, it might be broader, and then there's more to write about inside of it.
Okay, as opposed to like narrowing it down too much within some things, that could happen. It can make it easier for the reader to follow along. It can also make it easier for the writer to write about. There have been instances, and I'm sure you have experienced them, where you kind of start to forget, wait a minute, what was my argument? And you have to kind of go back and find the topic or the thesis. The more direct the topic or the thesis is, probably the better you are going to be staying on task. There have been thesis statements before where people will kind of start to lose their way. And you get too many ideas kind of competing for supremacy that we kind of lose track of the argument. So let's go with the dream, since that one was kind of getting mentioned a couple times. What would be a compound sentence that we could use to kind of describe the dream? So we could go, one night, Chief has a dream about mechanical stuff. About like a mechanical slaughterhouse? Okay. What would be a good conjunction now to use if I'm going to add more information about it? Always go with and. We'll start with and. What would be some details about the dream?
I don't know how to show the sensitivity.
Well, I don't have to do that yet, because I'm just establishing the scene at this point. You mentioned specifically.
And he witnesses the
Hanging from a girdle.
Yeah. What is a girdle? Something like is it what?
No.
What's the thing that's like a corset?
I know.
Corset.
Yeah.
No, what is the thing that people wear to like support their stomach? Is that a last name? Whatever. There's like a special thing that you put around
The corset?
so it doesn't
The
weigh.
corset? Or the
I don't know what it's called.
corset is what women would wear in.
Yeah,
Was it up through Victorian, where like it would like really shrink stomach and hurt your bones and not good for you, and damage internal organs. Now,
I told myself I was getting my eyebrows.
what kind of now that I've established the scene, I want to have an example coming from the book. And this would be where I would kind of quote it, and we're not going to say that, hey, you have to quote it word for word because we don't have the book in front of us. What would be a good type of sentence to use now to introduce the quotation? If we've already written a simple, and now we just wrote a compound. Matthew's thinking,
Take a shot in the dark here. Complex.
let's turn the lights off. Here's the thing I like about a complex sentence when you're introducing a quotation. I'm not a fan of standalone quotes where a person will like finish the sentence and then start a new one. Quote, here's something from Hemingway or Chopin or Sinclair. And not to say that it can never be done. Bless you. But if you write a complex sentence, what you're doing is you're kind of transitioning into the quote. Don't worry about what a quote would be, but what would be like a dependent clause that we could use to introduce that quote? And we can take a look at after, although, as, because, before, even if, even though, if, in order that, once, provided that, rather than, since, so that, and that, though, unless, so on, so on, so on.
Where is the last thing just hanging from a girl?
I looked it up.
Not just any girdle, the girdle.
Quote, and then I'm going to paraphrase, like his stomach is, or stomach, ripped open, ... dust, gears, all that stuff fall out. Now, what do I need to do after I provide my quote? I need to get into my, citation. I need to get into my analysis. How many sentences do you think you should do for an analysis? And again, assuming that you have some time to kind of think about it. Brooke says 5.
7,000.
2, 1.
One.
It's going to vary. More than 1. But I'd say at least 3. If, after this, I write a simple, followed by a, followed by a,
Complex.
when I'm done with my analysis, I need to conclude my thought, bless you, and then I could go back to a simple. When it comes to writing style, and I'm certainly not going from here on out, all your essays, you must go simple, compound, complex, simple, compound, complex, simple, and then repeat, because that's not going to be realistic, especially for TWAs and things like that. But from a stylistic point, if you can vary word choice and you can vary sentence structure, you establish rhythm, which makes it very readable. If I put a comment in an essay that it's sounding clunky, there's probably a good chance that you're using the same type of sentences over and over and over.